Hello, my friend. I am often asked about how people can get even more witch wave and more magic in their lives overall. And I have the answer. You can join me over on the Witch Wave Patreon. This is how you can hear from me and my other magical guests on a weekly basis via my Witch Wave Plus bi-weekly bonus episodes. And you get the regular Witch Wave episodes ad-free, and you get detailed show notes for all of it. And all Patreon members also get access to my monthly ritual workshops, which you can attend live or watch the recording of at your leisure throughout the month. Rewards for some tiers also include magical merch and contests where you can win witchly prizes, as well as early heads up about my workshops before they sell out, and opportunities to work with me one-on-one. And all backers get access to our exclusive digital coven, where you can connect to a community of other wonderful Witch Wave witches around the world. So head on over to patreon.com/witchwave and sign up. It's a magnificent way to get more magic in your life and to support the show. Thank you so much.
The world is filled with bewitching people, and you might be one too. Welcome to the podcast where art is magic is real, and reality is stranger than dreams. I'm Pam Grossman, and this is The Witch Wave.
Hello and welcome to the Witch Wave. And oh my gods, do I have a treat for you today? It is certainly a treat for me because this episode features a conversation with one of my academic heroes, Professor Ronald Hutton, who pioneered and certainly helped legitimize the field of pagan studies. His 1999 book, The Triumph of the Moon, A History of Modern Pagan Witchcraft, used rigorous research and engaging prose to tell the true story of modern paganism and Wicca. In it, he corrects misconceptions, such as the idea that there was an unbroken witch cult lineage, as purported by such influential figures as historian Margaret Murray and Wicca developer Gerald Gardner. At the same time, the book celebrates paganism and modern witchcraft as a brilliant revival and reimagining of ancient magical practices and ceremonial traditions. This reinvention is best viewed through the lenses of art, socioeconomics, and evolving expressions of gender, power, and pleasure. The movement creatively repurposes timeless magical practices and romantic ideals and applies them to the modern world. As Ronald and I discuss, practicing some form of paganism or contemporary witchcraft is an exercise in holding opposing truths. Yes, our ancestors, no matter what part of the world your family is from, most likely practiced what we would now consider to be folk magic, ceremonial rituals, spiritual healing, divination, nature worship, and communicating with the dead and non-human entities. This is true of virtually all peoples around the world, particularly if you go back far enough in certain histories. But no, These people likely would not have considered themselves to be witches, at least not in the sense we use that term or mean it today. They would most likely not have been engaging in the frenzied, femme-centric sabbats as described by those accused of being witches under circumstances of extreme duress during the European and colonial witch hunts of the 15th through 17th centuries. And yes, there are now self-identifying witches like me and possibly you, but no, the people who are still being targeted as witches around the world in places like Cameroon and Saudi Arabia are likely not practicing malevolent witchcraft, nor are they likely self-identified witches themselves. Lots of contradictions, and I know that can be challenging to hold at the same time, but Ronald's work does it beautifully. And this whole conversation got me thinking about the concept of lineage, about how much many of us long to be part of a lineage, while often having little proof of exactly where or who we biologically come from, or what those people may have themselves practiced or believed. Now, this is particularly true of those of us who are members of any sort of diaspora, though I would argue that even for those who still live where their ancestors did, much of that knowledge may have still been lost to time thanks to shifting social mores, assimilation, or lack of records. This is also why spiritual lineages are so appealing. Because with a spiritual lineage, as opposed to a biological one, you may find kinship with those you don't share obvious blood ties with, and yet whose magic feels like home. Speaking of lineage, I feel compelled to make a quick amendment to one of the responses to Ronald's questions of me during our talk. At one point in our conversation, you'll hear him ask me about my own identity as a witch. And in listing some of my influences, I failed to mention several significant ones, though many of them have appeared on this show and I've sung their praises elsewhere. But I would be remiss if I didn't mention here now Robin Rose Bennett and her coven of green witch apprentices that I practiced with under her tutelage for several years in my late 20s and early 30s. And she continues to be a guiding light for me. I also wanted to give a shout out to my own Queenright Coven, which practiced together regularly for 6 years and is still connected, albeit in a much looser form. Lastly, while we're on the topic of covening and convening, I must mention that on May 1st, which is Beltane, I will at long last be appearing at the Buckland Museum of Witchcraft and Magic in Cleveland, Ohio. It will be an evening of conversation and celebration, and tickets are going really fast, so grab yours quick. Anyhow, I'm so thrilled to share today's conversation with the venerable Professor Ronald Hutton. But before we get to that, first, let's check and see what's come through on the Witch Wire.
Who is it?
Witches.
Aura writes, "Hi, Pam. It's no secret that we're living through some incredibly difficult times as a collective. And while we witches and magical folk may often take the eagle's eye perspective on life, many days simply feel heavy and sad. Would you be willing to offer a bit of divinatory encouragement today? If I were to ask a question of the oracular forces, it would be this. What is the most empowered stance that the magical community can take during this time?" Hi, Aura. Thank you so much for this thoughtful question. It's one I know is on so many people's minds, and it is certainly on mine. And I appreciate the request for me to do a bit of divination to answer it because it's such a big topic. And so today I will let my deck do most of the talking for me. So I am using one of my very favorite oracle decks to answer this question. And that deck is called the Wild Unknown Archetypes deck, and it's by Kim Kranz, who also happens to be a prior guest on this show. And so your question is, what is the most empowered stance that the magical community can take during this time? And the card I pulled for this was a little bit surprising, and yet I think it has great wisdom for us. I pulled a card called the Orphan. Yes, I know. But stick with me because here is some of what Kim writes about the Orphan card. She writes, quote, "To study the Orphan is to study the deep and challenging energy of our time. We are ever more connected, yet face collective isolation. The refugee crisis haunts our planet, children are separated from parents, and the earth begs for our attention. We are in a time of universal orphanage, of nature, of each other, of our own hearts. Take refuge in the fact that we all share this core wound and dilemma. It is normal to fear this card as it haunts the caverns of the soul. When it appears, take time, real time, to be in the presence of the feelings this card stirs in you. Let it humble you. What are you starving for? What is the deepest gift you could imagine giving to others? What has been rejected is quite possibly what is most needed, dear one." Unquote. And I will add that this feels like such a significant card to pull when thinking about the idea of lineage, which I was speaking to earlier. Because I do think that many of us are feeling abandoned by those who we thought were here to take care of us, whether that's political leaders, religious leaders, heads of businesses, parents, anyone that we thought was an authority. They were supposed to be the grown-ups, right? They were supposed to be the ones we've entrusted society with. They're the ones who were supposed to keep us safe. And look what they're doing with that power. They are choosing to get richer and more powerful and to protect only themselves and their inner circle, and to do it all at the expense of humanity and ecology and connection. And that is tragic. And of course, it can make us feel orphaned and neglected. But this card reminds me that the way to heal from a toxic authority figure is to reparent oneself and to take care of others. As the saying goes, we are the ones we've been waiting for. We can create our own lineages and build our own legacies. There's a really wonderful article in The Guardian that came out a couple days ago, and it's by Naomi Klein and Astra Taylor. And the article is called The Rise of End Times Fascism. And I really recommend everybody takes the time to read it. It is, listen, an upsetting article to a point because it really catalogs all of the very specific intentional ways that this tiny group of ultra-rich people are trying to consolidate resources and power. And it's horrifying. And yet, the article also offers a lot of galvanization and inspiration and motivation for how we can meet this moment and hopefully crush that movement of selfishness and dehumanization. They write, quote, "Our opponents know full well that we are entering an age of emergency, but have responded by embracing lethal yet self-serving delusions. Having bought into various apartheid fantasies of bunkered safety, they are choosing to let the earth burn. Our task is to build a wide and deep movement, as spiritual as it is political, strong enough to stop these unhinged traitors, a movement rooted in a steadfast commitment to one another across our many differences and divides, and to this miraculous, singular planet, unquote. And that movement that these writers are describing to me is the antithesis of being orphaned. It is about building our chosen spiritual family. And we can do that with tenderness, inventiveness, compassion, and deep, intentional magic. We can reparent the orphan by embracing the love of spirit, the goddess, the gods, by re-enchanting our relationship to the natural world and with the natural world, and then by choosing to actively embody the divine here on earth. And we do this by building new communities of kindred spirits. In other words, we can acknowledge the feelings of being orphaned and isolated by those who have abandoned their responsibility and their care for the human race and for the planet and all of the organisms that we share our home with. But also, we can acknowledge that we are part of a much grander family, and we can use that power and that stance to operate from in the days ahead. I hope that is helpful, and I thank you so much for sharing your concern and your care with me. Now, on to my guest. Ronald Hutton is professor of history at Bristol University. He is a leading authority on ancient and medieval paganism and magic, on the British Isles in the 16th and 17th centuries, and on the global context of witchcraft beliefs. He is the author of 17 books, including The Triumph of the Moon, A History of Modern Pagan Witchcraft, The Witch, A History of Fear from Ancient Times to the Present, and his recent book, Queens of the Wild, Pagan Goddesses in Christian Europe, an Investigation. Ronald frequently appears as an expert on paganism and witchcraft on British television and radio programs, too numerous to name, though I will say one of my personal favorites is when he pops up in the hilarious docu-parody series Cunk on Britain. His work has been trailblazing in the realms of academia and religion, as well as in shaping a more humane geopolitical response to the very real witch hunting that still happens across the globe. Ronald was recently awarded the title Commander of the British Empire, an honor bestowed to those who have made a highly distinguished contribution in their field, as he so clearly has. Ronald joined me remotely from his home in England, and you can also watch the video of our conversation over on my YouTube channel, which is at Phantasmophile. Ronald Hutton, welcome to the Witch Wave.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here, ma'am.
I am so honored that you have taken the time to speak with me today. I am a great admirer of your work, and you've also been incredibly generous with me behind the scenes, because every time I've sent you an email when I'm writing my books and have a question for you, you answer immediately, which is shocking and so appreciated. So thank you.
You ask really interesting questions, ma'am.
Why, thank you. And I've never been called ma'am publicly on the podcast before. So you're also making me feel very grown up, Ronald. I appreciate that.
What would you like me to do? I'm being very British and formal, which comes naturally to me.
You can just call me Pam, which rhymes with ma'am, so easy for you to remember.
Indeed, yes.
Yes. So, Ronald, I want to start by just introducing our listeners and our viewers to the role that you have, not only in the academic community, but specifically in the pagan community, which I see as kind of an uneasy yet celebrated role, insofar as I'll just highlight one of your many books. You wrote the book, The Triumph of the Moon, and that came out in 1999. And this is one of the first books, to my mind, that really sought to tease apart the veracity versus some of the misconceptions of paganism, specifically in Western Europe and in the US. And many pagan people didn't necessarily appreciate some of the debunking that you were doing, while others were thrilled to have a more true history revealed to them. And so I was hoping you could speak to the tensions of that polarity, if you will, in your work, and specifically around that book.
Yes, with pleasure. The tensions, as far as I know, as far as I experience, pretty well all on the far side of the world from me. The context of the book in Britain seems to have been utterly different from the context elsewhere in the world, because the book was written in the course of the 1990s with the full support of the leaders of the British pagan community, with whom I was already closely associated before I decided to write the book. What had happened was, by 1990, belief in what you might call the origin myth of modern paganism, the idea that it was an enduring, persecuted, ancient religion that has survived in secret to the present, had already collapsed among the leaders of British paganism because of work by academic scholars and also by growing doubts in the community about the evidence. And as a result, there was now a vacuum in which modern British pagans didn't know where they'd come from. There was an uneasy suspicion that they might all have been invented by some rather odd character in the 1950s or 1940s.
Are you speaking of Gerald Gardner?
Yes, who was getting rather a bad press at that time. And as a result, I agreed cheerfully to carry out the research, having the position to do so, to find out where, as far as I could tell, British paganism really had come from. And that's why I didn't write the book to debunk anything. The debunking had already happened. I wrote it to try and fill a gap, to give paganism a history of which I hoped it could be proud, by showing that it had come out of some of the most important cultural currents of the previous 200 years in Britain, and could claim as its emotional and intellectual ancestors some of the greatest figures in that culture, like the Romantic poets, and some of our finest novelists and artists. In other words, paganism was quite central to my nation, instead of being a bunch of loonies and frauds on the edge. And that was the argument of the book. And it worked like that. It was accepted as that by the people who, for the previous 20 years, and in some cases the previous half century, had been the most respected figures in British paganism. And they were my dear friends. But to my consternation, when my book traveled across the Atlantic and across the equator, it hit a lot of territory where people had just recently become pagans, according to the foundation myth, and believed it completely. So when my book arrived, it appeared like a battering ram against their beliefs. I was viewed as a naysayer and a debunker, which of course at home I wasn't. And as a result, helplessly, I looked on as my book became a weapon in a series of local struggles between different factions of pagans in America, Canada, Australia, and New Zealand. Because none of them apparently knew the circumstances in which I'd written the book, there was nothing I could do. To my immense pleasure, the people who are some of the greatest elders in American, Australian paganism turned out to be delighted by what I'd done, because in many ways they'd been neck and neck with the British pagan leaders. So Margot Adler became an incredibly dear friend. I was devoted to her.
I loved her.
And Oberon Zell was another natural ally. And people who helped root Australian paganism, like Julia Phillips, and people who became prominent, like Caroline Tully, became my friends as well. So I couldn't really help what happened. It's really up to others.
Of course, of course. That's so interesting to me that people back at home were so supportive of this book. And as you said, you consulted with them, you had their allyship and their friendship. I wonder if you think what happened is that paganism, because it spread out, modern paganism, and it started touching all of these other parts of the world, where often these are people who are looking for some kind of ancestral rootedness. Personally, for example, I was raised Jewish. I come from Eastern European ancestry. And so as an American, there is so much that tends to be lost when it comes to looking at our history, when it comes to experiences of assimilation and so on. And so for me as a young Jewish kid, yes, I had modern American Judaism, which wasn't like quite the fit I was looking for. So when I found paganism, it felt like, I'm home. And then to be taught that even that lineage didn't have this unbroken, magical, matriarchal origin. I remember experiencing a bit of like, well, am I a fool? Am I a fraud for loving this and for embodying this so deeply? But then, I grew up and I then was able to, through your work and the work of others, to reweave meaning for myself through a whole host of my own magical practices and my own meaning making. And so I understand that feeling a little bit foolish that this thing you believed in is based not entirely on fiction, but on many fictions. Do you think that's fair to say?
I was with you right up until when you said it was based on fictions, because there's nothing fictional about the roots of paganism. It's a modern complex of religions and spiritualities which draw upon genuinely ancient ideas and images.
Yes.
And recombine with a worship of actual pagan deities, streams of unbroken cultural current which have been coming down through the centuries from the ancient world, like ceremonial magic, which I think is really important to modern paganism. It gives us the circle and the quarters and the purifications.
Yes.
And the invocations. And for operative magic, this wonderful heritage of folk magic, cunning craft, service magic, and seasonal rituals and festivities. Although actually this is less important in most modern paganism than perhaps it should be. The incredible love affair of the Christian centuries with the literature and art of the pagan ancient world. So devout Christian artists like Botticelli and Velasquez and Lord Leighton could all paint Venus, my favorite goddess.
I love her too.
As a representative of the divine feminine, expression of beauty and love.
Yes. Well, thank you for clarifying and allowing me to clarify. I suppose I didn't mean fictions entirely. I remember learning about the pagan wheel of the year, and many people listening will know some of those holy days, such as Letha and Mabon and so on. And then I remember learning that it wasn't until 1974 that those holidays were even, shall we call them, named or codified, and that the ancients wouldn't have called it those holidays. And even the construct of the Wheel of the Year is a relatively modern construct. So perhaps fictions was a clumsy word that I used, but I think some people, I curse a lot, Ronald, so excuse me, you're very proper. But Some people might say, oh shit, here I was thinking that Mabon is this beautiful, holy holiday, and I've been practicing it and feeling so connected to these imagined ancestors or what have you. And then they feel a little silly when they find out that it wasn't until 1974 people use that language. Now, for me, I think, well, how beautiful. Isn't all, arguably, religion a storytelling practice? And doesn't it morph and syncretize over time? And isn't it alive? And isn't that wonderful? But I could also see someone feeling like, oh, but I was told this was really old and it's not. And I feel stupid about it. So I suppose that's what I was trying to gesture towards, if that makes sense.
Yes, I do understand. Thank you very much. As ever, Pam, you're educating me.
Oh, well, thank you. Now, what I want to really delve into is, how are you experiencing being one of the world's experts in the academic space when it comes to paganism and the occult and witchcraft? How has that perhaps evolved for you over time? Do you feel like there's more acceptance of this kind of material in the academic space, or do you still feel like you have to be cautious regarding the material that you're exploring and writing about?
It's a mixture of the two. On the one hand, I keep my contract, my unofficial contract with the world in which I have to work and move by never discussing my own religious beliefs.
Mm-hmm.
And that detachment enables me to be able to speak about paganism to people in general without people feeling that I'm trying to fasten a line of my own on them.
Mm-hmm.
But when it comes to the more general treatment of paganism with a capital P in the British academic system, there's been an exponential change since the 1990s. Because I worked on the subject, and I stress all I did was research into the subject as far as my colleagues were concerned, I never expressed a personal religious belief deliberately.
Mm-hmm.
But just because I worked on it, I endured 10 years of what could be called either soft persecution or repressive tolerance. 3 examples.
Yes.
One is that in 1994, I addressed a big pagan conference in London. In the audience, unknown to me, was a Church of England missionary who then went away and denounced me to a national gathering of the National Church as, quote, Professor of Celtic Studies at the University of Bristol. The only thing that was right about that was Bristol. And a high priest of modern paganism. I was then called in by my head of department, who expressed disquiet at the line that my research was taking. And I had to persuade him that the clergyman concerned had not bothered to do any research and that I was not presenting myself as a pagan missionary.
There you go.
And he was still not very happy that I plugged on. 3 years later, there was a job advertised at my university in my department. And when the candidates gathered together on the day, waiting to be interviewed, all that they could talk about, according to the one who got the job, was there was supposed to be a witch on the staff.
Oh, my.
Worse than that was a year later when the student newspaper of the university invited me to have an interview. And they told me they were starting a series on professors doing really interesting research, and they'd like me to be the first interviewee. So I allowed them in, and I talked to them about my research for Triumph of the Moon, which was just finishing. And then the student newspaper came out with a picture of me on the cover with the line underneath, warning, this man could be a witch. And then there was a double spread inside in which they'd taken the statements I'd made completely out of context and indicated they couldn't prove I was a witch, but I was researching into it. I obviously knew a lot of witches, and clearly witches were Satanists.
Oh,
so
boy.
I was a secret Satanist. And I wondered what to do. Should I sue a student newspaper? You know, it's kind of beneath one's dignity.
Indeed.
And I waited for my colleagues to say anything. And although some of them avoided me for weeks, nobody said a thing. But then there came the time of the year when I was supposed to get my increment in my wage. Now, this is a small rise in salary you get every year, up a certain scale, and I didn't get it. And the only reason for not getting the increment is that you hadn't performed satisfactorily. And I'd performed really very well in every other way. So my pay had been frozen without a word said after that article. And then the next year came and my pay was still frozen. Now, I had a young family at the time, so this really hurt.
Oh my goodness. And that's discrimination too.
Well, we had no such rules in those days.
I see.
And then came the third year, and Triumph of the Moon had come out and got really good reviews. It had been made obvious what I was doing and what the book was about. Suddenly, that year, I got a raise equal to all the money that I hadn't been given in the previous 2 years.
My goodness.
But absolutely nothing was said. It was also terribly British.
You didn't bring it up with them?
No.
My goodness.
I felt too downtrodden.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
I just wanted to keep my head down, hang on in there, do a good job and wait for life to get better.
Yeah, not make waves.
And things did get better at my university after that. But in the wider academic sphere of Britain, things didn't. And for example, in the early 2000s, an American scholar who liked my previous work, which was not on paganism, went to Cambridge, which is Britain's finest university, just in terms of the indices you use to measure quality. And he asked the Cambridge historians what I was currently doing. And they told him that he could forget about me because I'd gone mad, become a witch, and left the profession.
My goodness.
Research grants dried up for me, invitations to speak dried up. I found myself a pariah for some years. But I stuck at it. I carried on researching and publishing. And then later I got all the rewards from about 2010. Things began to change. I was elected to the British Academy, which is supposed to be the honour given to the top 0.5% of British academics. And not just to one section, history, but to archaeology as well, because of my work on the ancient world.
Hell yes.
I was given government appointments because of my knowledge both of the ancient world and of modern pagans. In which situation I could do everybody a lot of good.
That's just it. I mean, you're a pioneer, and often pioneers have to pay the price for putting themselves out there and forging a new path and deal with a lot of the initial misunderstanding and fear and controversy. So, I mean, I'm so grateful that you kept going, Ronald, because I imagine many people would not have.
It was a bad 10 years.
My word.
In the early 2000s, I had to put up on the one side with the ostracism in my profession. And on the other side, every time I opened my email in the morning, I'd find another poison pen letter from an American pagan who regarded me as an enemy of his, because of course I'm not. This was doubly painful. But I helped found a whole new division of academic work, Pagan Studies, along with other people. And the American Academy of Religion held a special session to honor my work in its 2020 meeting.
Congratulations. And also, I'm going to say this in a very obnoxious American way, so forgive the impropriety. Aren't you like one rung beneath being a knight? Like, you were just given an incredible honor last year by the British government as well. Can you educate my American listeners about that?
I think I need to educate British listeners as well. It's one of the silliest names for an honor in the world. I've been made a Commander of the Order of the British Empire.
My word. Should I be saluting?
No. The Order of the British Empire goes up in levels. There's a member, there's an officer, and then there's a commanding officer. And a knighthood is the next honour above that.
We'll call you on the knight track. How about that?
I don't think so. I think that in order to get a knighthood, I'd have to carry on for 10 more years at the rate at which I've carried on for the last 50. So I'm getting a bit tired.
Fair enough. Fair enough. Well, you are a sir in my mind. How about that? Now, let's talk about some of these pockets of academia that have opened up thanks to your work and the work of others. I know here in America, for example, Rice University, there's now a certificate you can get, the Gnosticism, Esotericism, and Mysticism certificate called GEM, if I'm remembering correctly. Exeter University, I believe they in the UK have some kind of track to study the occult and esotericism in the academic context.
It's a master's.
It's a master's? Thank you. And I hear about these things now, and I have to kind of wipe the drool of envy from my face because when I was a student at NYU, no such thing existed. I really had to cobble together a very mishmashed curriculum for myself to try and study witchcraft and the occult and consciousness and art and mythology and all the things that I love. And so it thrills me that now students have access to some of these different pathways. And I wonder, are there others that you know of, other areas of academia or places that people can study this more formally that you're aware of or that you are encouraged by?
America is much better at this than Britain. And of course, therefore, I know less about it in terms of courses.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think that there are many places in the UK where you can study paganism as such, but there's a subtle adoption of awareness of it.
Mm-hmm.
So religious studies departments in Britain now routinely recognize paganism as a religion. And although there aren't many people teaching about paganism, people who are interested in it are encouraged to pursue their studies. There's the Exeter MA, which is a wonderful cluster of scholarship. And also, I developed over the years the largest postgraduate school of students supervised by one person that my university has ever had. My routine number of students at any one time working on theses with me was 25.
Wow.
And over 50 of them have completed. And that's an awful lot of scholarship.
My goodness, it's so exciting.
Yeah.
How wonderful. On that note, we're going to take a quick break and we'll be right back. This episode of The Witch Wave is brought to you by the Storm Cloud Oracle. A storm is brewing, and within the clouds, a message awaits you. The Storm Cloud Oracle is a new dark oracle deck from Claire Gregory of Bone Arrow Jewelry. Made up of bad omens, feared creatures, and gothic emblems created to help you find hope, courage, and meaning in dark times. Inspired by Gothic and occult symbolism, this 44-card deck transforms bad omens into wisdom, revealing the silver lining in every storm cloud. But the Storm Cloud Oracle doesn't exist just yet. It can only be brought to life with your help. The deck is live on Kickstarter now. Back it to claim your own deck and support this magical project. Go to Kickstarter and search for the Storm Cloud Oracle or visit Instagram at Storm Cloud Oracle to find the link. Step into the storm. The clouds have messages for you. Support the Storm Cloud Oracle on Kickstarter now. The Witch Wave is sponsored by BetterHelp. Look, I know therapy can feel like a big investment, but the state of your mind is just as important as your physical health. Maybe you're like me and you spend money on nutritious food and skincare and a gym membership, which in my case I barely use, but that's another story. But I can say, hand on heart, that spending money on therapy is one of the best investments I give myself because I'm taking care of my mind and my well-being. And when I'm feeling mentally healthy, my magic, my work, my life all benefit immensely. It makes such a difference, I cannot even tell you. But let's talk numbers here. So traditional in-person therapy can cost anywhere from $100 to $250 a session, and that adds up fast. But with BetterHelp online therapy, you can save on average up to 50% per session. With BetterHelp, you pay a flat fee for weekly sessions, saving you big on cost and time. Therapy should feel accessible, not like a luxury. And with online therapy, you get quality care at a price that makes sense and can help you with anything from anxiety to everyday stress. Your mental health is worth it, and now it's within reach. And remember, therapy isn't just for people who have experienced major trauma. It can just help you navigate the little things that come up and make you feel anxious or frustrated or upset. And it can help you come up with strategies to help you live the life you want. It can also help you celebrate the good things, and you know I'm a big fan of that too. I am telling you, I would not be living my dreams as a witch, writer, podcaster, whatever I am right now, without having regular therapy sessions. Therapy has helped make me a more productive, more happy, and more potent person. So what are you waiting for? With over 30,000 therapists, BetterHelp is the world's largest online therapy platform, having served over 5 million people globally. It's convenient too. You can join a session with the click of a button, helping you fit therapy into your busy life. Plus, you can switch therapists at any time. Your well-being is worth it. Visit betterhelp.com/witchwave today to get 10% off your first month. That's betterhelp.com/witchwave. Hi, Witchwavers. I know, and you know, you want some Witch Wave merch. And our print-on-demand merch site is now available through Dashery. So if you want to get different variations of our gorgeous Witch Wave logo designed by Thunderwing, or our Witches Are the Future catchphrase designed by Lara Antal, printed on everything from t-shirts, mugs, totes, stickers, magnets, notebooks, you name it, you can. Shirts come in different styles and fabrics and are available in sizes small through 5XL, so you can order whatever you'll feel you're most comfortable and most magical in. So head on over to witchwave.dashery.com. That's witchwave.dashery.com, or you can click the Dashery link in the Witchwave shop over at witchwavepodcast.com/shop. Welcome back to the Witchwave. Ronald, I want to switch gears just a little bit. This is the Witch Wave, and a lot of my work is around the archetype of the witch and the practice of witchcraft. And full disclosure, I don't know that you and I have ever discussed this, but I do identify as a witch.
What kind of witch?
Oh, what a wonderful question.
Do you have a tradition?
I just love the word witch.
Yeah.
So I do not use the word Wiccan about myself, just because I have a lot of respect for that path of initiation. And because I didn't go through it, I just don't feel comfortable using that word. There are several other reasons why. I say I'm pagan. Sometimes when I'm being cheeky, I say Jewitch, just because I have not cast off my Jewish ancestry and folk magic either. So yeah, sometimes I say an intersectional feminist witch. It's very much coming out of, Starhawk, whom I got to interview on this show, was very foundational for me when I was a young person. And a lot of my practice, some of it is rooted in a lot of the Greek and Roman deities, but then I've also incorporated some of my own ancestral magic in it. And for me, art and literature and music is very instrumental to the ways in which I've developed my practice as a creative being as well. So it's all a bit of a mishmash. I wish I had a more succinct answer for you.
It's a very good answer. Thank you very much.
Why, thank you. Thank you for asking. But I want to take the opportunity to thank you once again, which I know British people hate, but I am going to thank you once again for writing the incredible monumental book, The Witch, A History of Fear, From Ancient Times to the Present. This book was so helpful for me in my own research when I was writing my book, Waking the Witch. and it continues to be very, very inspirational for me and very informative. This is a book that came out, as I recall, in 2017. Is that right?
That's right.
So first of all, let me ask, just for listeners and readers and viewers who might not be familiar with this book, what caused you to want to write such a tome?
Well, ever since about 1980, I'd wanted to write a book about the history of witchcraft. But the main evidence for it and the main area of research in the 80s and 90s was the early modern witch trials.
Mm-hmm.
And I just found them too depressing
Tell me
to
about
immerse
it.
myself in them. So I took a different approach, playing to my interest in folklore and my interest in comparative studies across the world.
Yes.
And so I found a way in. The person I most liked and respected at that time, who became a personal friend, was Carlo Ginzburg, who wrote a series of wonderful micro-studies of popular belief, was interested in the idea of ancient traditions helping form the image of the witch in the Middle Ages and the early modern period. That's something that I would do. The only difference being that Carlo tended to put everything under the umbrella of shamanism.
Yes.
And I didn't. There were some differences between us in our approach, but the affection and the honor that I feel for him and the kindness he's shown to me is outstanding. But also, I became more and more aware of the growing amount of witch persecution in the modern world.
Yes.
And wanted to do something about it, to understand its origins better, to draw attention to it. I became involved personally in the controversy in South Africa over whether the government should reintroduce laws against witchcraft, because the rate of murder of suspected witches was rising fast, especially in the northern province of the country.
Sure.
And the argument went that if you reintroduced actual laws against witchcraft, then people could be prosecuted for being witches and then fined or locked up instead of being murdered.
Right.
So there was a big debate over whether to do this.
How interesting.
A panel of native academics, quite high-ranking academics, the Ralushai Commission, was asked to produce a report, and it produced a report arguing strongly for the reimposition of laws against witchcraft. What was slightly disconcerting was that the people on the panel seemed mostly to believe in the real existence of witches themselves and wished to prosecute them. One of them said he had some reservations over whether or not they rode around at night on the backs of baboons, but he was prepared to believe everything else said against them.
Right.
And I was one of a number of academics brought in to express views. My view was very strongly to carry out the long, painful process of convincing people that if they don't fear witchcraft, it can't harm them. And that is a double win, because if you convince people of that, they stop being vulnerable to it because they're not frightened to death. They also stop accusing their neighbors of it and murdering them or trying to get them locked up.
Exactly.
Everything calms down. And in fact, that view won. Not because of me, but because of the whole cumulative effect.
Wow.
And the South African government decided not to introduce laws against witchcraft, and still hasn't. Unlike Cameroon, Ivory Coast, Ghana, Malawi,
Yes.
and of course Saudi Arabia, which still beheads people for being witches.
Yes, indeed.
Anyway, my book called for a worldwide campaign to eradicate the persecution of suspected witches, just as we've eradicated smallpox and are slowly lessening polio and malaria. This helped precipitate a conference at Lancaster University, UK, which has a great track record in study of human rights, in 2019. And I was invited to give one of the two keynote addresses.
Yes.
And the rep from the United Nations gave the other. And we drafted a UN resolution to discourage witch hunting across the world, which was adopted by the UN in 2021, being the first time such a thing has happened.
Wow.
And last year, the Pan-African Parliament, which is a body representing all African states, especially south of the Sahara, issued a set of guidelines to help African governments enforce that resolution. Now, so far on the ground, not much has happened. But the fact that these things are happening at the top for the first time is very encouraging. And I feel that my book was not written in vain.
Ah, wonderful, wonderful. Well, that's really tremendous. And I was not aware of all of those different campaigns that you've been involved in. That's fantastic work. I suppose then for me, it begs a question that I grapple with a lot in my personal practice and my own identity, which is on the one hand, straddling the line between trying to convince people that witches are not scary and should not be persecuted, while at the same time identifying as a witch publicly, obviously with very different context and a very different cultural lineage than somebody who might have been accused of being a witch. And I think a lot about, sometimes I'll see t-shirts or people holding up posters that say, "I'm the granddaughter of the witches you could not burn." I wonder if you've seen some of those signs.
I've heard of.
Yes. On the one hand, I so appreciate the sentiment of it. And on the other hand, it's like, well, first of all, you wouldn't be their granddaughter. You'd be their great, 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 etc. But second of all, most of those people who were accused of being witches or are accused of being witches by outside forces never would identify as witches. Or if they have any kind of magical practice, it's one of folk magic or counter magic. They are not malevolent actors in the world, right? And so I'm wondering for you, I know sort of the story I tell in my own research and my own books, but I wonder for you if you can identify a moment when people started using the word witch to describe themselves in a positive way. Do you just trace it right to the Wicca movement in the 1950s, or would it have been earlier?
No, certainly by the 1920s, people are doing it as part of becoming modern. They may have been doing it in other parts of the world earlier, but I can speak for Britain.
Yes.
Especially women, because the witch really is one of the very few images of independent female power that traditional society has given us.
That's right.
As to the question of, do we disempower modern witches by suggesting that people needn't fear witchcraft? I think that there are a number of ways in which we can cope with this one, and I have to face up to this, the possible consequences of my own actions. For a start, I think we can have it both ways, because if you really believe in magic, then magic can work. In medicine, the placebo effect is a mighty one, incredibly important.
Agreed.
So magical healing can be extremely effective. Ritual and magical practice can build character, confidence, self-awareness. One of the greatest thrills to me is seeing pagan practice, especially witch practice, turning tongue-tied, shy people into marvelously eloquent and very strong people. And the effect of belief in magic and indeed belief in deities on people can be profoundly transformative.
Yes.
Physically and mentally, emotionally, spiritually. I've spoken of the eloquence effect, but there are times when I felt I've literally seen people glow physically.
Yes.
I've seen somebody's eyes change color for a while when they were gripped by the sensation of being a goddess. These are wonderful things. So it is extremely potent.
Yes.
I cannot prove that any deities exist. I cannot prove they do not exist.
Yes.
So for people who feel an affinity with certain deity forms, to work with them and embrace them can be tremendously empowering, life-affirming, and do wonderful things for them. So I argue for a quite subtle engagement with belief systems and the idea of magic. Where I do draw the line, and I don't think that I'd be unusual in this, is to suggest to people, occasionally this happens, who identify as witches, that threatening to curse their non-witch neighbors is probably a bad idea.
Right. Touche. I love it. Can we circle back to that second point as well when you talk about the 1920s being a time when people started using the word witch to describe themselves in a positive light? Because for me, when I'm thinking about these things, I'm thinking about the effect of like Michelet's La Sorcière in the 19th century and Matilda Jocelyn Gage's Woman, Church and State. And I'm thinking how that also filters through the world of fiction. I mean, as people now know, Matilda Jocelyn Gage, this is L. Frank Baum's mother-in-law. She was a theosophist. She had a huge influence on him inventing this matriarchal witch-based culture in Oz, right?
Yep.
Introducing the idea, arguably, of the good witch. And I know there are some other examples, but he really is one of the more famous ones of even introducing the idea of there being a benevolent witch to pop culture, for example. So do you think some of those are the threads that people were picking up on in the 1920s when they started calling themselves witches?
I think absolutely so. And you've mentioned fiction.
Mm-hmm.
It appears most often in novels.
Yes.
Especially written by women, but not always.
Mm-hmm.
There's a very strong feeling between the wars that embracing the figure of the witch and embracing aspects of paganism will be rather like taking a vitamin supplement. It will restore to modern society aspects in which it's become deficient and therefore unhealthy.
Yes. Oh, that's so beautiful, Ronald. And of course, I have a predilection for that point of view, shall we say.
Vitamin W.
I love it. Vitamin witch, indeed. On that note, we're going to take another quick break, and we'll be right back. This season of The Witch Wave is brought to you by Black Phoenix Alchemy Lab. For 20 years, indie scent artist Black Phoenix Alchemy Lab, known affectionately as BPAL, has been formulating perfume oils for each month's full moon, inspired by their colorful names and descriptions in historical almanacs. 2025 will be no exception. Look for their monthly launches called A Little Lunacy, which include not only these limited edition scents for fellow lunatics, but also an ongoing series of perfumes inspired by classical artworks, and some which raise funds for a variety of charitable causes. The lab's general catalog is teeming with perfume oils, hair gloss sprays, beard oils, and bath oils, which can be yours year-round, covering a truly bewildering range of scent types and inspirations that include cinema, Gothic literature, and occultism. To that end, BPAL recently brought back a recurring scent series called An Evening with the Spirits, drawing from legends and historical accounts of Victorian-era spiritualism. These haunting scents, such as Psychodynamic Discharge and the Fox Sisters, will remain in Black Phoenix Alchemy Lab's web shop well into 2025. Month by month, year by year, the lunacy continues at blackphoenixalchemylab.com. I've got a really special new offering for you all, and that is new Witch Wave ceremonial soap, which has been made in collaboration with my favorite soap company, 2 et al. 2 et al. Makes soap and skincare using traditional alchemical techniques to transform pure water and plant-based ingredients into beautiful, handcrafted, cold-processed soaps, which are also magically charged. These soaps are beyond bewitching and luxurious, and after being a hardcore fan of them for a while, I knew I wanted to collaborate with them, and I am so thrilled that they agreed. I'm overjoyed to now offer Witch Wave Soap by 2 et al., available now exclusively in the Witch Wave shop over at witchwavepodcast.com/shop. 2 et al. Founders Matthew and Natalie and I put our heads together to come up with a special soap blend that is deeply magical just for you. The Witch Wave blend incorporates such intentional ingredients as black salt for cleansing and protection, yarrow to aid in divination and love, and mugwort, also known as artemisia, for lunar connection and visionary insights. It's also blended with the most beautiful fragrant oils, including frankincense, which smells incredible and also helps amplify connection with the divine. We were invoking deities like Artemis and Hecate when designing the ingredients of the soap, as well as the packaging. You'll note the skeleton key on the side. And this soap can be used whenever you want to ready yourself for ritual work or simply as a daily ceremonial practice to help you cleanse and recenter into your own magic. So go ahead and order Witch Wave soap by Two et al. And me over at witchwavepodcast.com/shop. And if you want to check out Two et al.'s other incredible alchemical soap blends and skincare, you can do so at twoetal.co. That's TUETAL.co, and use offer code WitchWave15 for 15% off your order from the Two et al. Website. So once again, you can get our new exclusive Witch Wave soap from the Witch Wave shop, and you can get 15% off other Two et al. Offerings from their site, twoetal.co, with offer code WitchWave15. Welcome back to the Witch Wave. Ronald, how did you first begin to get interested in this material? I understand that your mother was very influential on you, and I don't know how she would have described herself, but it sounds like she was very interested in paganism and magic and so on. Was that a big driver in your own development, you think?
Very much so. I think we embraced it together. My mother was more interested in magic than I was. She read cards, and she subscribed to Prediction magazine, which is where everybody advertised in those days.
How wonderful.
She certainly didn't identify as a witch, but what she and I shared, and I grew up with her, but I was a bit more articulate about it than she. It was largely innate in her, but passed on to me, and I made it more active, was a potent combination of an intense love of the natural world, and especially of the countryside in which we lived, and an understanding of its ancient past, an understanding of its modern ecology, and a sense that it was a spiritualized landscape, a landscape inhabited by indwelling spiritual forms, but also an intense love of the Greek and Roman classics,
Yes,
on which she'd been raised, and on which she raised me. And she and I both saw the deities of those very much as our deities, and they still are mine instinctually. But I then added a love of the Norse tales, the Icelandic Eddas and sagas,
sure.
and a love of Irish medieval mythology, and remained devoted to those. And so when I encountered Wicca for the first time, which was at the age of 14, 15, in the end of the 60s, it made sense to me as a mystery religion within a development out of the wider, softer focus paganism, in which I felt at home, both literally at home and mentally. And there was a vast literature, Victorian and Edwardian, of this combined love of the countryside and love of ancient Greek and Roman paganism, especially British, on which I could draw, with which I remain in love. I discover more of it more and more the time. Now, when I encountered Wicca in the late 60s, it was Gardnerian Wicca.
Sure.
Practically the only show in town in my bit of the world at that time. And I really liked the people, and I really liked what they seemed to do. And I really liked what we would now call their outer court rituals, seasonal rituals, which I attended. But then I learned my first lesson about pagan groups, in that before I could even think of being old enough for initiation, the group quarreled and broke up.
Oh, yes. Typical. Oh.
Then I worked in London, and I encountered Alexander's circle. Learned a lot listening to Alex, who impressed me deeply. But his type of Wicca was, I was 18 by now. It wasn't quite so much what I was looking for, which the rural Gardnerian Wicca, the people, had been. I was looking for a connection with the pagan ancient world, particularly the classical texts.
Yes.
And a link to the countryside. And Alex was far more about hands-on operative magic, especially healing, which was very important to him. and the raising of spirits of different kinds. There was a lot more ceremonial magic in Alex's Wicca, whereas I liked the classicism of the other kind. That and the fact that I was just scared.
Yeah.
I was 18 and on my own and impressionable. And Alex's circle, they were imposing people. They were good looking.
Very sexy.
A bit older than I. So I learned and admired, then quietly backed away. But it gave me a good education in what Wicca was.
Yes.
And above all, it gave me endearing friends. And it was those friends later that got me into contact more and more with the national pagan community, especially Wicca, because that was still most of the paganism that was around.
Yes.
And why, when that community decided it needed a historian, I was the obvious one to whom they turned because they knew me.
Yes. How magnificent. I'm remembering that the person who introduced me to your work is a dear friend of mine, Christina Oakley Harrington, who runs Treadwell's books, and she's been on the show and so on. And I just heard she's giving a public lecture at Harvard soon. I'm not sure if it'll already have happened by the time this episode comes out. But she often talks about how important it is for people to have historians, especially when it comes to these groups that are so misunderstood. And sometimes I often say that witchcraft is either trivialized or sensationalized, and historians occupy this wonderful space of hopefully doing neither of those, right? And so I know, she really has great respect for the historians of the pagan community, of which you are obviously one of the leaders.
Well, she's a dear friend of mine and one of the great figures in contemporary British paganism. When the history of British paganism in the early 21st century is written, then Christina will be one of its main characters. She's done wonderful things for British paganism, particularly Wicca, in pretty well every single way. And I honour her as well as being very, very fond of her.
Oh, indeed.
Can I just do one thing?
Please.
And that is explain my background.
Yes,
just
please.
In case anybody wonders. Because rarely I'm giving an interview from home instead of from my office at the university. And people with sharp eyes may wonder about what's in the background.
Yes. Ronald, if you could do that while first describing it, because some people will be watching this, but some people will only be listening. So if you could describe it as well.
With pleasure. It's the people who are watching it I worry about. Because what you can see in my background are St. Bridget's crosses, or actually Bridget the goddess's crosses, traditional woven crosses for the Feast of Bridget, Candlemas in Ireland. And yellow ribbons for the beginning of spring are attached. And the really, really, really sharp-eyed will recognize an image of Bridget as goddess underneath. And this is actually not because I have a personal devotion to Bridget, and I'm certainly not a Christian, but it's because when I moved into my present home, I probably rather pretentiously decorated and dedicated the 3 bedrooms on the first floor to the Judgment of Paris. And I made one of them dedicated to Venus, one to Juno, and one to Minerva.
Perfect.
I also stashed up decorations in these rooms associated with goddesses who are like the Roman goddesses whom I'd named. And there were certain obvious affinities, for example, between Bridget and Minerva and Athene.
Yes.
So I put representations of all of them in the room dedicated to the goddess. And when guests arrive, I'd ask them to take the Judgment of Paris, which of the rooms they'd like to sleep in for the night. And I should have known what was going to happen, because absolutely everybody chose either Venus or Juno.
Yeah.
Practically everybody chose Venus. There are a few who liked Juno because of all the peacock feathers.
Yes, of course.
But nobody wanted to sleep with Minerva, Bridget, Athene, etc.
Really?
And so in the end, I gave up, moved out the bed and turned it into my study, which, given the interests of the goddesses concerned, is entirely appropriate.
Perfect. It's a palace of the intellect. I love that.
To which I try to live up.
I think you have far exceeded that goal. Well, first of all, Ronald, now I just want you to take us on a tour of your entire house, but maybe another time, because it sounds absolutely magnificent. But we are, sadly for me, coming up to the end of our time together, at least for this go-round. In our final moments together, I just wanted to give you the opportunity to mention if there are any new books that you would like people to know about or any other things, emerging for you in this springtime and beyond you would like to promote.
Oh, gosh. The word promote always scares an old-fashioned...
Do you know, I felt a little sick saying it to you, so we both feel a little oogie about that word.
I think you're perfectly justified in asking what I'm writing.
There we go.
At the moment, I'm interleaving different types of book because I've written 2 volumes of a 3-volume biography of Oliver Cromwell, who's one of our major British statesmen.
Okay.
And that's for the other half of my career because I started as a Tudor and Stuart historian.
Sure.
If I'd started as a historian of paganism, I'd never have got a job. So I established myself in a mainstream Orthodox area and then felt secure enough to take the risk of having my salary frozen and
being an academic freak.
Described as going mad and that kind of thing. Yeah. And survived. And in between each volume of Oliver, I produce a pagan book. So I'm actually on a pagan book at the moment between volumes 2 and 3 of Cromwell. And my publisher will no doubt come up with some lurid title like Queens of Blood and Sperm or something like that.
Oh, stick with that one, Ronald. That will do fabulously here in the States.
It's not me. But I prefer Goddesses of Love and War.
Oh, how beautiful.
Because I'm writing about a particular type of ancient goddess who was patroness of both love and sex and war. And there are lots of them. Inanna, Ishtar,
sure.
Forms of Aphrodite, definitely Venus.
Sure.
Hathor, when she starts out, she then gets split with Sekhmet. And Freya and the Morrigan.
Oh, how magnificent.
I'm very fond of all of them.
I cannot wait to read that book, Ronald. Do you know when it will be released, or are you still working on it?
Oh, I'm still working on it, but I should finish it sometime in the summer. And so it'll come out for summer next year, which is how publishers work.
Indeed.
It'll be a summertime book to suit torrid goddesses.
Wonderful. Well, listen, Ronald, earlier you described someone in, a rapture, and you said their eye color was changing and they were glowing. And I wonder if I look that way right now to you, because this has just been an ecstatic experience. I'm so thrilled that you took the time to be with me, and I'm truly grateful for your work. Thank you so much. What an honor this has been.
You always glow, Pam. It's part of your vocation to do things like this, which is why you do them so well. I very rarely give interviews, but I've been so struck by the extraordinary interest and perception of your questions to me over the years that I felt it was the least I could do.
I'm so flattered. Thank you, Ronald, and may this be the first of many future conversations between us.
That would be lovely.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That's it for the show. Thank you again to Ronald Hutton for forging a new path with such brilliance and such generosity. Do you have questions, feedback, need some witchly advice, or just want to share something magical that happened to you recently? Drop us an email or voice message over at witchwavepodcast@gmail.com. We'd love to hear from you, and you just might make it on the Witch Wire. The Witch Wave is a Phantasmophile production written and produced by me, Pam Grossman. This episode was recorded, edited, and mixed by Josh Wilcox and/or Walter Nordquist and myself. Our theme music is the song Hand and I by Lycanthia. Our new Witch Wave logo was designed by Thunderwing. Special thanks go to Matt Freeman, Laura Antal, and Cece Pascal. You can check out information about this and other episodes on our website, and now buy Witch Wave merch at witchwavepodcast.com. You can follow us on Instagram and Facebook at witchwavepod, and you can check out my witch emoji for iPhone by going to witchemoji.com or downloading it in the App Store. My books Waking the Witch from Gallery Books and Witchcraft from Taschen are available everywhere now. And if you want more Witch Wave or you would just like to support the show, please join us over on Patreon. That's patreon.com/witchwave. Thank you so much for listening. Witches are the future. I'll catch you next time on The Witch Wave.